I'm Mary Brosnan from Glenamaddy Boyounagh Heritage Project. In conjunction with Intangible Cultural Heritage and National Heritage Week 2020, we welcome you here to this recording to showcase one of Glenamaddy's hidden treasures, Aifrinn, our penal mass site, based here in Lisheenaheltia, Glenamaddy, County Galway, dating from 1695 to 1778. May I introduce Sean Ganley. Sean is going to speak on behalf of his mother Bernie. Bernie is one of the organisers of the Mass here at Aifrinn. Sean is going to talk about the Penal Days.
Thanks very much, Mary. I'm going to describe a little bit about the Penal Laws, how they were enacted in Ireland, their effect on the local population, and why sites like this came into being back during those penal days from the late 1690s into the late 1700s. So, going back in time, around this particular site here at Aifrinn, the Hollow of the Mass, or the other name for it was Cruachán and Oireachtais, the Hill of the Gathering. There were a series of hills, so this created a hollow in which Mass was celebrated at this tree site during the Penal Laws. What were the Penal Laws? Well, they were a series of laws enacted in 1695 by the Irish Parliament, which was led by the Protestant ascendancy at the time. The laws came into being and seriously oppressed the Irish Catholic population. It took away their religious freedom. They could no longer practice their faith. It took away their land, their education, and so many other rights, and became a massive tool of oppression throughout this time. Edmund Burke, the great Irish statesman and philosopher at the time, said that they were a machine of oppression, degradation, and debasement of human nature itself. So these were extremely harsh times, and not that long ago, only 10 or 12 generations ago, our ancestors gathered around here to celebrate Mass. The priest would come in disguise from nearby churches or monasteries, in this case it was Ballyhaunis, and travel and come and celebrate Mass here at this particular site. Lookouts would be posted on the hills to look out for the dreaded Cotaí Dearga, the redcoats, who were the forces of the king or queen throughout the penal law period, who would ruthlessly enforce the laws of the time. So the laws were put in place as a series of Catholic oppressions that went back long before this, to the time of King Henry VIII. So in 1534, King Henry VIII in England wasn't allowed to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon. So the Pope stopped him, Clement VII at the time, said you're not allowed to annul your marriage, so Henry VIII broke away and set up the Church of England and became supreme ruler of the Church at the time. He then brought a series of oppressions on the Catholics in Ireland and indeed in England as well, where he destroyed so many of our abbeys, monasteries and churches throughout the country. Fast forward into the early 1600s. In 1607, the Irish Gaelic lords, the Catholic lords, had to flee Ireland, the Flight of the Earls it's called, and go to Europe seeking help from Catholic countries. In 1609, a series of Protestant plantations started in Ulster. Fast forward then again into the 1640s. From 1649 to 1653, Oliver Cromwell and the parliamentarians came over with their new model army and ruthlessly enforced Protestant rule on the Catholic population in Ireland at the time. Again, destroying churches, taking away land. Indeed, they removed most of the Irish Catholic lands and put it into Protestant hands under the Ascendancy Act, the Adventurers Act at the time. By the time of the 1690s, two forces collided in Ireland. You had the Williamites under King William of Orange, who was married to Queen Mary II, versus the Jacobites under King James II, who was prior to that King James VII of Scotland. So the Jacobite and Williamite wars raged in Ireland from 1688 through to 1691. The main battles were the Battle of the Boyne, the famous Battle of the Boyne in 1690, which was won by William of Orange's side, and then a decisive victory for the Protestant side in 1691, about 30 miles south of here, at the Battle of Aughrim, which is the bloodiest battle in Irish history. And we know that people from around here fought for the Catholics, fought for the Jacobites at that time. Indeed, there were excavations outside the Friary in Dunmore a few years ago, and they found Jacobite bodies with the Jacobite coins buried under the street in Dunmore. So we know that people were engaged in those wars at the time. Those wars came to an end with the Treaty of Limerick in the early 1690s. This treaty was not adhered to. The treaties signed by Sarsfield and Ginkell on the Catholic and Protestant side at the times were overruled, and the Protestants brought to bear the penal laws from 1695 and into 1697. They got more and more harsh as times progressed through the 1700s. So in 1704, the Protestant ascendancy really ratcheted up the pressure on the Irish Catholics. In 1719, one of the most notorious of all the penal laws was brought to bear, where Catholic priests who wouldn't take an oath to Queen Anne at the time would be physically mutilated by the British at this time. The 1700s were a very harsh time for the Catholics as they were deposed of all of their lands. And in 1741, it's little known that there was a famine in Ireland, which went throughout Ireland. It was almost as bad as the Great Famine of 100 years later, 1845 to 1848. But Glenamaddy in 1741 saw 300,000 Irish people lose their lives to famine and fever. So these were very harsh times, throughout which the people around here adhered to their Catholic faith, practiced it in secret. This faith was the very bedrock, it was the backbone of everything they represented and everything they stood for. And for more than 130 years, until the last of the penal laws were repealed under Catholic emancipation in 1829 by Daniel O'Connell, the people around here and throughout Ireland continued to practice their Catholic faith throughout the country, in places like Aifrinn, at mass trees, at mass rocks, in secret hollows, secret places. So they had lost their lands, they had lost their right to be educated. They weren't allowed to educate Catholics. Irish Catholic schools were disbanded. Irish Catholic families, the noble families, couldn't even send their children overseas to Catholic countries to have an education. The language was brought under pressure as well. An Irish Catholic couldn't own a horse worth more than £5. An Irish Catholic couldn't hand over land to his son. It had to be subdivided amongst all of the sons, unless, that is, the eldest son converted to Protestantism. Then they would inherit all of the land. So these were very precise laws designed to oppress our faith, designed to oppress our culture, designed to break our land and break our stranglehold over a country that we had lived in for thousands of years and controlled through various oppressions. So eventually, over time, these laws were lifted. In 1793, we got the right to vote once again. Irish Catholics could now vote, and prior to this, Irish Catholics could not be members of Parliament. They couldn't be solicitors, barristers, they couldn't hold a profession, they couldn't teach. There were a series of oppressions like this that went on for that 130-year period. So the penal laws reigned here throughout the period of King William III, Queen Mary II, Queen Anne, King George I, King George II, enforced again by the redcoats, and eventually broken. And we'll move forward to where Patricia and Teresa will tell us a bit more about what happened here at this site and how we move forward into today and still reflect on these times past, what our ancestors went through 300 to 200 years ago, and how we'll keep this faith alive and keep this heritage and history alive by visiting this site, by celebrating Mass when we can at this site, and reflecting on those memories of times past. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Now can I introduce Teresa Comer Niemanian from Lisheenaheltia. Teresa is an organiser of the Mass here at Aifrinn. Teresa will speak of how the site was restored in the 1990s. Over to you, Teresa.
As we grew up in this area, we were always told that the Mass was said here at the Mass tree in the Penal Days. In 1988, the old tree was blown down by a storm in preparation for the millennium in the parish. The people of the village decided that they would restore Aifrinn. They would restore Aifrinn. So Michael Ganley, assisted by Michael O'Connor, Martin Joe Mannion, Lawrence Comer, Declan Mannion and Martin Mannion, built this wall around the Mass tree. We got the Joyce family from Lisheen, from their old home in Lisheen, donated the stone. In 1999 we had the first Mass here, and we celebrated Mass annually until 2018. So then, but there was no Mass last year, so hopefully again we will have Mass down the road. The priests will be able to come and say Mass. Father Goley and Father Mooney came annually to say the Mass for us, so we say thank you to them. And we had a cup of tea afterwards and a chat, and it was a lovely occasion. And the children from the area really loved the Mass. That's all I have to say. Patricia's next.
Okay, thank you, Teresa. May I introduce Patricia Scarry, chairperson of Glenamaddy Boyounagh Heritage Project, and she's also Ní Mannion from Lisheenaheltia, and now she resides in Woodfield, the next townland. And Patricia is going to recite the poem on Townlands and Glenamaddy by Sean McVeerish.
I always associate this poem with this area. It may not be, but I associate it with this area because as a child we used to be told that there was a Mass going to be here, and an old man swapped his clothes with the priest, and there's a lot of that in this poem, so that's why I always associate this area with this particular poem. So this is it, on Townlands and Glenamaddy, entitled by Sean McVeerish. The Aifrinn leitche is gachro jenta vi pobl jay excap. Nor a húlamar glow ag chach nor dro on Townlands and Glenamaddy. Cain glow siúd ag chach nor dro, sin torin cos na gabal. Se hugan saidery arman rí on Townlands and Glenamaddy. The chas an seanfar Brian O'Lee is siúl I dro an tuggart. Is corsé cogger in a clús on Townlands and Glenamaddy. O ahar Sean, se huggin na Cotaí Dearga. Ní féidir latsa je nish on Townlands and Glenamaddy. Tá tusa óg a ahar Sean tám féin in nervaha. Jane Mallart édi lomanish on Townlands and Glenamaddy. The Jane Mallart ganro well I gunja tel on sagart. Is shield she jora mora brown on Townlands and Glenamaddy. The gown assassini Brian O'Lee is Jimmy seer on sagart. The creach sheet Brian cran cui lord on Townlands and Glenamaddy. Ach Murphy call on Chana Ive, fat fasa fair talif. By a scale a rev ag fair fall is on Townlands and Glenamaddy. Now I have it in English for anyone that does not can get the Lisheen Irish. So I'll just recite it in English now. Here in the middle of the valley. The Mass was read and everything done. God's people were scattering, when a noise was heard coming in our direction, here in the middle of the valley. What is that noise coming towards us? It's the pounding of horses' hoofs. Here comes the soldiers of the King's army, here in the middle of the valley. The old man Brian O'Lee turned and walked towards the priest, and he whispered in his ear, here in the middle of the valley. Oh Father Sean, here come the redcoats. You cannot escape now, here in the middle of the valley. You are young, Father Sean, I'm at the end of my life. Swap your clothes with me now, here in the middle of the valley. The clothes were swapped hastily against the priest's will, and he shed big, sorrowful tears, here in the middle of the valley. The English captured Brian O'Lee and the priest went free. They hanged Brian from a 10-high tree here in the middle of the valley. But the fame of the brave old man will live as long as grass grows on the earth. His story will forever be told by men of destiny here in the middle of the valley. Sinead.
Thanks, Patricia.
So Patricia's reciting of An Townlands and Glenamaddy kind of tallies back to the story of Aifrinn, where you had the priests coming in disguise from the monastery, from the friary in Ballyhaunis in County Mayo, and they'd come across the Eskers, across the sandhills, to sites like this and say Mass, and they do so in disguise. They were hunted all the way, so everywhere that the priests went to celebrate Mass, they were hunted not only by the redcoats, which were the armed forces, but also by hired guns, the pursuivants. The pursuivants were the priest hunters. The most notorious of all of them was Sean and Sogart. Sean and Sogart was John Maloney from Ballintubber in County Mayo. He was renowned at the time for being a notorious drunk and a horse thief, and he was sentenced to be hanged in Castlebar. They said that they'd let him go free, the armed forces would let him go free if he'd become a priest hunter, and that he did with gusto. So he hunted priests all over the west of Ireland, found them, gave their names away, gave them over for execution or torture to the armed forces. The prices paid by the forces to the pursuivants, to the priest hunters at the time, was £5 to £10 for a Jesuit or a monk, £10 to £20 for a priest, and £50 to £100 for a bishop. These were enormous sums of money, enough to buy farms of land at the time, and he was a huge beneficiary of this at the time. On the other side, the rapparees were the local Irish who would enact revenge on the priest hunters where and when they could. They'd burn their property or try and kill them in reparation for giving away the priests at the time. So the Cotaí Dearga and everything that's covered in Patricia's reciting of the poem there may in fact reflect on this site or sites very like this with the story that was told on Shohé Law in Glenna.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you to everyone for participating in this film today, recording today. Thank you to Patricia, to Teresa and to Sean. And now we will record Noni in Castlecoot. Okay. Yeah. Now we're here in Castlecoot. I'm speaking to Noni Golden Niemanian from Lisheenaheltia. And Noni is going to tell us about the old history of Aifrinn. Over to you, Noni.
Okay, thanks, Mary. Now, Ireland was persecuted by penal laws from 1695 to 1778. Meanwhile, through all those years, Irish priests struggled to bring the Blessed Sacrament to all people who were brave enough to hear Mass. My grandfather, Larry Comer, was first to recognise Aifrinn as being the Mass Valley of the Penal Days. On his land, Mass was celebrated on Sundays. A priest came on horseback from Ballyhaunis each morning. But on one Sunday morning, the lookout boys were distracted and a woman betrayed the priest. He fled from the scene and just got as far as the next farm when he was beheaded. The chalice was found and handed in to the priest of the time in Clonberne Church, which was half parish of Glenamaddy. The bell was found by a Slattery family. It remained with them until they all died. I will now say a prayer for all the people who prayed, fasted and heard Mass in Aifrinn. We are the answers. We are the answers to their prayers. She the Vahawera, Taulan Nagarasta, Tawan Chirnalat, Ispani Yuhu Horm Nov, August Spani Tordunisa, and Yewera Waherjay, Gurnar Pakinish, August Uror Moshamil. A year Jane Trokra Ora. I hope I didn't leave anything out. I'm in my 86th, going into my 86th year, and my grandfather used to say, is Father Kivna Sean Posha, which means in English, an old child has great memory. So, Yakuna J. Bekmijiri sheet. That's it.
Thank you, Noni. We thank you all for listening to this recording, and we hope you enjoyed our presentation. And thank you to everyone who participated in this recording today, to Noni, to Teresa, to Patricia and to Sean. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mary.